In the spring of my senior year in Minneapolis, virtual classes came to a close and we waved goodbye to the screen of peers and teachers from our own spaces. Weeks later, my high school career officially ended with 4 steps across my basement floor in a cap and gown. After graduation, it felt like my future was shrouded from view. Plans to go to college were put on hold, and my cousin and I decided to take a gap year together instead. With a whole year ahead of me, I didn't know what to do with the free time I had. Sometimes, when I felt bored or restless, I would stare out my window and paint memories of moments when we could travel to places where the sky seemed endless. On May 5th, as the sun settled into the shadows of the neighborhood and the sky blushed at its bareness, I pushed out the screen on my window and I crawled through. The world that I once watched through the glass enveloped me, and I was amazed that the view could be so different on the other side of the window. Had spring in Minneapolis always looked like this? The roof became a place that I sat, day after day, taking in a scene that was constantly growing, blossoming, and changing form. I don't remember what gave me the idea to push past the boundaries of my room, but I know that in that moment, I was able to let go of the unknown that the pandemic had taken from me and feel grateful for more time to immerse myself in spaces that I thought I knew. In early summer, as I was passing time digging through childhood photos and schoolwork, I stumbled across a drawing I made in 2007. It was a self-portrait drawn in bold marker. In determined handwriting, I had written, "I need $10 just so you know." I laughed when I saw it, wondering who it was intended for, why I would have needed $10 at the age of 5, and whether my persuasive strategy had helped me reach my goal. Now, looking back, I feel excitement for my 5-year-old self, not only at my promising knack for hyper-realism, but also at the thought that I was already learning to find my voice through my art. In high school, I was taught to study and imitate other artists' work. I researched and replicated an artist's story, their emotions, and the things that they wanted to communicate. Through amplifying other artists' voices, I was inspired to find my own. I wanted my art to connect with people who shared similar experiences. I wanted my art to share stories that oftentimes go unheard. And when it felt like the world refused to listen, I wanted my art to scream my thoughts and feelings. On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis police at the intersection of 38th and Chicago. I was 1 block away from the site of his murder when I learned where it had happened. When the news spread, cities across the world echoed a cry of anger and sadness, and flooded the streets to protest. I wondered if thousands of people who never met George Floyd felt this monumental loss. How did those who knew and loved him feel? I felt called to create something that would not solely depict him in the 9 minutes and 29 seconds of his death, but portray him in words spoken by those who knew him throughout his 46 years of life. A window opened. Voices came together. People acted out against a corrupt system. Opinions on global issues began to shift. And I stood in a community that I had grown up in, one I thought I knew, and I watched it come together. For the next 3 months, I set up a stand on the corner of 39th and Chicago, where I sold t-shirts to raise money for organizations in the Twin Cities working for racial justice. Only a block away from what is now called George Floyd Square, I got to watch the area physically and spiritually transform. Strangers stepped past barriers onto the raw earth to remember and celebrate the life of George Floyd. People came back day after day to take in the scene on Chicago Avenue, one that was constantly growing, blossoming, and changing form. Meanwhile, all across the city, voices emerged. They called for change, demanded justice, advocated for accountability, and sparked action. I left Minneapolis around New Year's to spend the second half of my gap year in Arlington, Virginia with my relatives. Having traveled over 1,000 miles across the country, I felt how the physical distance from Minneapolis could create mental separation from the events going on there. On April 20th, after nearly a month-long trial, Former officer Derek Chauvin was convicted on all 3 charges in the death of George Floyd. In the tense moments before the verdict was released, the future was once again shrouded from view. This time, the future of my generation and those to come. Was it even possible to have hope that justice would be delivered when history had time and again said otherwise? As I planned this show, a memory resurfaced. On May 26th, my family and I entered the intersection of 38th and Chicago, where, after months of isolation, the scene felt surreal. Hundreds of people had congregated in the area, and the crowd was still growing, engulfing the ground we stood on like wildfire. Countless voices rose from the earth and charged the air around us. At a time when hands couldn't be joined together in grievance, in union, and in power, voices did. There I stood, in a place and time that the world's attention had turned to, and my eyes were drawn to something fluttering in the wind. A piece of paper with the determined and familiar stroke of a bold marker. Through the rumble of the crowd, one voice, belonging to some little kid out there, seemed to drown the others out.